Welcome, everyone, to Silas Grave Stories, where I share the kind of tales that might just make you double check the shadows around you. Before we get started, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more stories that will stick with you long after they're over. And hey, quick question. What time is it where you are right now? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to see how many of you are listening in the dead of night. All right, let's get into tonight's story. The night was quiet, and the road stretched ahead of me like an endless ribbon, illuminated only by my car's headlights. I'd stayed late at work again, the last one to leave the office, and now all I wanted was to get home, kick off my shoes, and forget about the stress of the day. I was about 20 minutes from home, taking the back roads to avoid the traffic lights. That's when I noticed it, a car, its headlights glaring in my rearview mirror. It was following close, too close. At first, I didn't think much of it. It's late, I told myself. Maybe they're just in a hurry, but as I made turns onto smaller and smaller roads, the car stayed with me. Left turn, right turn, it didn't matter. Their lights never left my mirror. My stomach tightened as I realized they weren't just heading in the same direction. They were following me. I slowed down slightly to let them pass, but they matched my speed. I sped up and they did too. My heart started pounding. This wasn't normal. Gripping the wheel tighter, I decided to test them. I turned down an old, nearly abandoned dirt road, a path no one in their right mind would take unless they were lost or looking for trouble. The car followed. My breathing grew shallow. I couldn't call for help. My phone was dead, and I was miles away from any signs of civilization. That's when I made a mistake. I glanced in my mirror too long, trying to make out the driver's face, and didn't see the branch lying across the road ahead. My tires hit it hard and the car jerked to one side, forcing me to swerve. The engine sputtered, but I managed to regain control. The other car slowed, then stopped. Its headlights dimmed for a moment before they turned off entirely, leaving me in darkness. That's when I felt it, a creeping sensation like I was being watched, not from behind but from outside. I locked my doors and stayed frozen, waiting for the car to drive off. But it didn't. Instead, I saw a shadow moving outside just beyond the reach of my headlights. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The shadow moved again, circling the car like a predator sizing up its prey. My headlights cast just enough light to catch glimpses of someone, moving just out of full view. "Stay calm," I muttered to myself, though my voice was shaking. "Stay calm." Suddenly, there was a tap on the back window, a soft, deliberate knock. My breath caught in my throat. I whipped my head around, but the rear window revealed nothing but the pitch-black night. I wanted to start the car and floor it, but the shadowy figure hadn't come from nowhere. What if there were more of them? What if they were blocking the road ahead? My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Another knock, this time on the driver's side window. My head snapped to the left. A face was pressed against the glass, pale and expressionless as though it belonged to a mannequin. The eyes stared directly at me, unblinking. I screamed and scrambled for the lock button, even though the doors were already locked. My trembling fingers fumbled over the dashboard as the figure stepped back into the darkness, disappearing from sight. Then the car behind me roared back to life. Its headlights flicked on, flooding my car with an overwhelming, blinding light. The engine revved loudly and the vehicle surged forward, stopping inches from my bumper. My instincts kicked in. If I stayed here, I'd be a sitting duck. I turned the key in the ignition. For a moment, the engine hesitated, sputtering like it might not start, and my heart dropped. But then, mercifully, it roared to life. I slammed the gear into reverse and whipped the car around, the tires screeching against the dirt road. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the path back to the main road. The car behind me followed immediately, its engine roaring like a beast. It was faster than me, more powerful. It gained on me quickly, closing the gap between our bumpers. I veered sharply onto the main road, my tires barely gripping the asphalt. The other car followed, its headlights flashing erratically now, like it was signaling something or taunting me. That's when I saw the turnoff ahead. An old gas station I remembered from years ago. I took the turn hard, nearly losing control, and pulled into the station's empty lot. I parked under one of the flickering lights and jumped out, hoping to find someone, anyone, inside the small convenience store. But the station was deserted. The pumps looked like they hadn't been used in years, and the glass door to the store was shattered, the interior dark and foreboding. I was alone. Or so I thought. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement again. This time not from the car, but from the shadows near the building. And then I heard it, a voice, low and raspy like it hadn't been used in years. "Why did you stop?" The voice froze me in place. It came from the shadows by the store, but I couldn't see anyone there. My pulse was pounding so hard it felt like my chest might burst. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. My voice cracked, betraying my fear. No response. I backed up slowly toward my car, scanning the area for movement. The other car had stopped at the edge of the lot, its headlights still blazing. But the driver wasn't coming out. They were just sitting there, watching. "Why did you stop?" the voice asked again, this time from my right. I spun toward it, but there was nothing there. Just empty air and the faint sound of the wind whistling through the broken gas station door. "I don't know what you want," I yelled. "Just leave me alone." A laugh came in response, dry and humorless, echoing all around me. "You started this, and now you want to leave." I didn't wait to figure out what that meant. I turned and bolted back toward my car, yanking the door open and jumping inside. The moment I slammed it shut, I locked the doors and started the engine again. That's when I saw him. A man stood in front of my car, directly in the beam of my headlights. He was tall, with a lean frame and clothes that looked wrong, like they didn't belong in this decade. His face was partially hidden under a wide-brimmed hat, but I could make out a smirk pulling at his lips. "Drive," he said, pointing to the road ahead. I shook my head, gripping the wheel tightly. "No, get out of my way." The man didn't move. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as though studying me. Then he took a step closer. I slammed the car into reverse, ready to back away, but the car behind me had crept closer. Its headlights were blinding in my rearview mirror, trapping me in place. The man raised his hand, pointing again to the road. "Drive, or I'll make you." I don't know why, but something about the way he said it chilled me to my core. I hesitated for just a moment, then shifted into gear and pressed the accelerator. As I pulled forward, he stepped aside, watching me pass. My headlights briefly lit up his face. His eyes weren't normal. They were completely black, like two endless voids. I gasped and looked away, my hands trembling on the wheel. The car that had been following me pulled out behind me again, staying just a few feet from my bumper. I didn't know where I was going anymore. I just knew I had to keep moving. The road ahead was unfamiliar, lined with thick trees that seemed to close in the further I went. My GPS wasn't working, and there were no signs, no lights, no signs of life. Just the oppressive darkness and the steady presence of the car behind me. And then, up ahead, I saw it. A second car, parked sideways across the road, blocking my path. I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding to a halt just a few feet from the second vehicle. The road was completely blocked. The other car, the one that had been following me, stopped as well. Its headlights turned off, plunging the area into near darkness. I was trapped. My mind raced for options. I could try to reverse and make a break for it, but with the trees on either side and the narrow road, I knew I wouldn't get far before they'd catch up. That's when I noticed something strange about the second car. It was old, almost vintage, with rust eating away at its edges and no license plate. The windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. Then the door opened. A man stepped out, but something about him felt wrong. His movements were slow, almost mechanical, as he turned to face me. His head tilted to the side, just like the man at the gas station. Behind me, the car that had been tailing me honked once, loud and sharp, breaking the silence. I jumped in my seat, my heart hammering against my ribs. The man from the second car took a step forward, his face still hidden in the shadows. I couldn't stay here. Slamming the gear into reverse, I turned the wheel hard and tried to back up, but my car jerked to a stop. I looked down. The gas gauge was empty. My chest tightened as I realized. I'd been driving on fumes for who knows how long, too panicked to notice. A tap came on my window. I whipped my head to the side and saw the first man again, the one with the wide-brimmed hat and the pitch-black eyes. He was crouched next to my car, staring at me through the glass. "You can't run," he said, his voice calm, almost mocking. "It's time to pay." "Pay for what?" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. "For taking the road," he said, as if the answer was obvious. Before I could respond, the doors of the second car opened and more figures began to step out. 4 of them in total, each moving with the same unnatural, jerky motions. Their faces were expressionless, their eyes hollow and dark. They surrounded my car, closing in slowly. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the wheel. "This isn't real," I whispered to myself. "This can't be real." The man with the hat leaned closer to the window. "You shouldn't have taken this road," he said softly, tapping the glass with a long, bony finger. "It belongs to us now." I reached for my phone, forgetting for a moment that it was dead. Panic surged through me as I realized I had no way to call for help. Then, without warning, the figures began to pound on the car, their fists slamming against the windows and the roof. The sound was deafening, like a drumbeat in the dark. "Let me go," I screamed, tears streaming down my face. The pounding stopped, silence fell over the road like a heavy blanket. The figures stepped back, their heads all turning toward the man in the hat. He smiled, a cold, empty smile, and raised his hand. "Run," he said. Before I could react, the headlights from both cars lit up again, blinding me. The figures disappeared into the light, leaving me alone in my stalled car. The engine sputtered once, then roared to life on its own. My hands moved without thinking, gripping the wheel as the car lurched forward, speeding down the dark road. The headlights behind me stayed close, but I couldn't see who or what was driving. As I sped down the road, a single thought echoed in my mind, over and over. I shouldn't have taken this road. The road ahead twisted and turned in ways that didn't make sense. I'd been driving for what felt like hours, but no matter how far I went, the surroundings stayed the same. The trees on either side of the road loomed tall and dark, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out the sky. The headlights behind me never wavered, their presence a constant reminder that I wasn't alone. My car seemed to be driving itself now, the steering wheel resisting every attempt I made to turn off the path. That's when I saw it, a sign on the side of the road, barely visible in the dim light. It was rusted and covered in moss, but I could just make out the words, "Dead End." I gritted my teeth, determined to keep going, but the car began to slow on its own. The gas pedal sank uselessly under my foot and the engine sputtered. The car came to a stop in front of an old, rickety bridge. It stretched across a black, swirling river that seemed impossibly wide and deep. The air here was heavy, thick with the smell of something metallic. I opened the door hesitantly, my legs shaky as I stepped out. The other car pulled up behind mine, its headlights switching off. I turned to face it, but it was empty. No driver, no passengers, just the sound of its engine ticking as it cooled. The man with the hat was standing on the bridge now, waiting for me. "How long did you think you could run?" he asked, his voice carrying easily over the sound of the rushing water below. I didn't answer. My throat was dry and my body felt like it was made of lead. He gestured to the bridge. "You made a deal, and now it's time to cross." "A deal?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What are you talking about?" He tilted his head as if surprised by my question. "You don't remember?" I shook my head, taking a step back. The man smiled, his black eyes glinting. Let me remind you. Suddenly, the air around me shifted. The darkness seemed to pull inward, swallowing the trees, the road, and even the bridge. In their place, images began to form. Memories I'd buried deep, memories I didn't want to face. I saw myself, younger and desperate, standing on the very same bridge. It was late at night, and I was leaning over the railing, staring into the river below. Tears streamed down my face as I whispered into the void. "I'll do anything," I'd said. "Just let me escape this. Let me have another chance." And then, from the shadows, the man with the hat had appeared. "You'll do anything?" he'd asked, his voice cold and steady. I'd nodded, not thinking about the consequences. "Anything." He'd smiled just as he was smiling now. "Then it's a deal." The memories faded and I was back on the bridge, the man standing in front of me. "You asked for a second chance," he said, his tone almost kind. "I gave it to you, and now I've come to collect." "I didn't know you knew," he interrupted, his voice sharp now. "You may have forgotten, but you knew. Every road you've taken since that night has led you back here. It always does." Behind him, the bridge began to creak and groan as if it couldn't bear the weight of what was happening. "What happens if I cross?" I asked, my voice trembling. His smile widened. "You'll find out." The man stepped aside, leaving the path to the bridge open. The creaking sound grew louder and the air around us felt heavier, almost suffocating. I hesitated, my mind racing. Crossing felt like walking straight into a trap, but staying here wasn't an option. I had no idea what would happen if I refused, but something told me it would be worse than whatever waited on the other side. "You're running out of time," the man said, his voice calm but firm. "Choose." I swallowed hard and forced myself to take a step forward, then another. The wood beneath my feet felt unstable, each plank groaning under my weight. The river below churned violently as though it were alive and hungry. Halfway across, I stopped. "What's on the other side?" I called out, my voice barely steady. The man tilted his head, his smile never wavering. "The truth," he said simply. Something about his answer sent a chill down my spine, but I couldn't turn back now. I kept walking, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the center of the bridge, the world seemed to shift again. The air grew colder and the noise of the river disappeared. Everything was silent, eerily so. And then I saw it. On the far side of the bridge stood me, but it wasn't just me. It was a version of myself I didn't recognize. My clothes were torn and stained, my face gaunt and pale. My eyes were hollow, lifeless. The other me stepped forward, staring directly at me. "You don't belong here," they said, their voice a distorted echo of my own. "I don't understand," I stammered. The man with the hat appeared beside the other me, his expression still calm, almost amused. "You've been living on borrowed time," he said. "This is the moment it runs out." The other me stepped closer, and I realized with growing horror what was happening. "I was never supposed to leave," I whispered. The man nodded. "You made the deal and I kept my end, but every bargain has a price." The other me raised a hand, reaching toward me. I wanted to run, to fight, to do anything, but my body wouldn't move. I was frozen, paralyzed by fear and the weight of inevitability. When their hand touched mine, everything went black. I woke up with a sharp gasp, my chest tight and heart pounding. The sun was starting to rise, casting a dull light through the windshield. My head felt heavy, groggy, and for a moment I couldn't remember where I was. I blinked a few times, trying to clear the fog in my mind. The familiar hum of the engine idling made it all feel strangely normal, too normal. I was still in my car, parked by the side of a quiet road, the trees on either side stretching into a dense forest. I rubbed my eyes, trying to get my bearings, but everything felt off. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness. No other cars, no sounds from the usual bustle of nature. Just quiet. I checked my phone. No service. I could feel a tight knot in my stomach, that feeling you get when you realize something's wrong, but you can't put your finger on it. My mind flashed back to the bridge, the man with the hat, the deal, the feeling of something chasing me. Had it been real? Or was it just a nightmare? I looked around the car again, half expecting to see something lurking in the backseat. But it was empty. I let out a breath, trying to shake off the creeping anxiety. But then something caught my eye. The rearview mirror. I glanced into it, only to freeze. The reflection staring back at me wasn't mine. It was someone else's face, my face, but wrong. My eyes were hollow, darker than I'd ever seen them. My expression was blank, emotionless, like the shell of a person who had long stopped living. I blinked, shook my head, and looked again. Nothing. Just the same empty road stretching out behind me, the morning light creeping through the trees. Just a trick of the mind, I muttered to myself, trying to calm the rising panic in my chest. But the knot in my stomach only grew tighter. I started the car, intending to drive away to put all of this behind me. The road ahead looked just as quiet as it had when I stopped. But there was something strange about the landscape. It felt different, like it wasn't the same place I'd been driving through last night. I shook my head again, trying to focus. It was probably just exhaustion, the long night on the road, the fear that had gripped me. I drove a little farther down the road, and as I passed the first bend, a chill washed over me. Up ahead, I saw it. The old gas station, the one I remembered from years ago, a place I thought had been abandoned for good. The faded sign and broken windows had always given it a ghostly, forgotten feel. But now the lights were on. The place looked functional, as if it were still open for business. I slowed down, confused. I hadn't seen this gas station in years. Had I driven past it before? No. I would have remembered. And then, just as I was about to turn my attention elsewhere, I saw it. The car. The same car that had been following me all night. It was parked at the pump, the engine off. The driver nowhere to be seen. It felt like the same unsettling, ominous presence from before. I rubbed my eyes and blinked. Was this some kind of twisted déjà vu? My mind was reeling. I couldn't understand why this place, this car, was haunting me in the same way it had earlier. But then, as I looked more carefully, something clicked. I noticed the open sign on the door. The pump was active, the gas station was running, and there were cars parked nearby. The station was fully functional. It looked just like any other gas station, the kind you'd stop at on a long, lonely road trip. The lights were bright and inviting, casting a soft glow over the pavement. I could almost feel the tension easing as I drove closer, the sound of my tires crunching on the gravel. It was normal. Everything seemed normal again. I parked at one of the pumps, deciding I needed something to drink. The air outside was cool, a stark contrast to the weight I had carried with me for miles. I stepped out of the car, my legs a little stiff from sitting too long, and made my way toward the door. As I pushed it open, the bell above the door rang and I walked inside. Behind the counter there was a man, middle-aged, wearing a faded work shirt, his face worn but friendly. But what caught my eye was his hat, a black hat, the same kind the man had worn in the nightmare, the one with the unsettling smile, the one who had made the deal with me. My heart skipped a beat, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. This couldn't be happening. It was just my mind playing tricks on me. I had been through too much fear, too many sleepless hours. The man looked up and smiled warmly. "Can I help you?" I hesitated for a moment, trying to push away the unease that had settled in my stomach. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "Just need something to drink. Whatever's fine." He nodded, turned to grab a bottle of water and a soda, and slid them across the counter. I reached for my wallet, forcing my hand to steady as I paid for the drinks. The whole time I tried to keep my eyes from wandering back to his hat, but it felt like it was pulling at me. The man never seemed to notice. He was just doing his job, completely normal. "Have a safe trip," he said as I grabbed the bottles and turned to leave. "Thanks," I muttered, still feeling that strange weight in my chest. I stepped outside and walked back to my car, feeling the cool breeze brush past my face. It was just a gas station, just a stop on the road, nothing more. I could leave all of this behind. I started the engine, the familiar hum filling the car. But as I pulled away and glanced in my rearview mirror, something made me look back. I turned my head just for a moment. The gas station sign was still there, bathed in light. But this time, the words seemed to jump out at me. I squinted, trying to make sense of it, and my stomach twisted. The sign didn't say open anymore. It said in bold, stark letters, "You made the deal."